Drummers in the Civil War were an essential part of the regiment and were known as the voice of the commander. Their main role was in conveying the commanding officer's orders to the troops, as well as maintaining the speed of march. During the noise of battle, words of command may not be heard, so the troop movements were communicated by a series of different calls which the inferior officers and soldiers were expected to be able to recognise and understand. A full-strength regiment would consist of 10 companies, each of between 100 or 200 soldiers, and each company would be allocated 2 drummers.
Drummers during the Civil War were not called drummer boys as in later years. Instead, the drummers of this period were grown men and were deemed to have better qualities than the common soldier. They were expected to possess the virtues of obedience, silence, secrecy, sobriety, valour and loyalty. The drummers were also called inferior officers and as such received the equivalent of a corporal's pay of 1 shilling a day. A drummer would certainly have to be vigilant in order to see by the slightest movement of an officer's staff the intended manoeuvre and to beat the appropriate call. This would then be taken up by the other drummers in the battalion and to spread the commander's orders through the ranks.
A drummer's role was not just to convey orders, it was also to parley with the enemy. He would be sent forward with messages and would carry paper and writing implements with him in order to write responses. This indicated that the drummer probably was quite well educated. He may also be fluent in a number of languages. While he is behind enemy lines, he might take the opportunity to spy, but he needed to take great care, despite the fact it was bad form to kill a drummer during a parley.
Each regiment had a drum major, who was the most senior of the drummers. His role was to task, appoint, train and superintend the regiment's drummers, and on a long march he was to ensure that the drummers were rotated, allowing for rest time for the others. He was also responsible for taking into custody any enemy drummers who may come into camp to discuss the ransom of prisoners. The drum major's pay was 1 shilling and 6pence a day.
Now let's take a look at the drum itself. The drums we use are based on the surviving version in the Royal Armouries Museum. It's of plain wood with painted rims and is 21 inches in diameter and 21 inches tall. The skins are of calf hide and it's tightened with rope and leather tensioners. Underneath the batter head, the top of the drum, is a linen dampener to slightly subdue the boom of the drum.
The drum is suspended from either a leather strap or a scarf, and on the march is carried at an almost 90-degree angle to the body and is steadied by the left hand which lies across the top. The drum has a carrying strap or handle so it can be suspended on the back. Running across the skin of the lower head is a gut snare which produces a characteristic crackling sound when the drum is beaten, and this enables the drum to be heard at long distance. The drum is beaten using 2 drumsticks of turned wood, not so very different to the sticks used today, but slightly thicker and heavier. The left hand is positioned over the top of the rim, holding the drumstick vertically. The left drumstick is moved by twisting the fingers and wrist. The right hand drumstick is held in the grip of the hand at right angles to the left stick. The drum skin is quite robust, and it is possible to beat the drum with force to make a loud sound.
In terms of clothing, it's generally thought that the drummers would wear the same as the soldiers, according to the scant clothing records that are in existence. In the odd case, the colonel might have spent some money on making the drummers look smarter, but lace and feathers aren't going to last very long during the campaigning season, and due to the troop turnaround due to casualties and sickness, this could get very expensive. It is thought that if a drummer played at an officer's funeral, he could claim his hat or sword as a payment. The drum major was not on the regimental list, and due to his better means, it is thought that he might wear better clothing, but this is just conjecture.
Let's now move on to discuss and beat the calls of war. According to the drill manuals of the time, there were 6 calls that were used in the field to direct the soldiers in their general manoeuvres: the call, the troop, the march, the preparative, the battle, and the retreat. There were also other calls used in the garrison, such as reveille, beaten at daylight, and tap 2, beaten in the evening, and originally used to indicate the closing of the taps by the victualler, but it also meant that the watch should be set and the officers and the soldiers should retire. The drum calls that we use are all beats taken from the mid-17th century period. However, with the exception of the voluntary and march, they were not the actual calls used by the armies in the British Isles at the time because they were not written down.
The first of the calls of war is the call. This tells the soldiers to gather their arms and armour together and form up behind their ensign.
Beat the call! Now we come to the march. Very few marches were written down at the time. One march we do know for sure is the English March. This was decreed by Charles I in a warrant in 1632, several years prior to the start of the Civil War. The warrant was an attempt to adopt a standard march for English regiments. As defined in the drill manuals, the soldiers were to open their order to 6 feet between each rank, to shoulder both musket and pike, and to direct their march either quicker or slower according to the beat of the drum. As written on the warrant, the English march is preceded by a short voluntary, which informed the soldiers they were about to march off, and they should advance their pikes and shoulder their muskets. Beat the voluntary and march!
The next call is the preparative. It indicates to the soldiers that they should close to their due distance for skirmish both in rank and file and to make ready, so that they may execute upon the first command.
Beat the preparative!
The next call is the troop. By this command, the soldiers should shoulder their muskets, advance their pikes, close their ranks and files to their order, and to troop along with or follow the officer to the place of rendezvous.
Beat the troop!
Next call is the battle. With this command, the pikemen are to charge their pikes, the muskets to club their muskets, and as implied, press forward and engage in battle with the enemy.
Battle!
The final call is to retreat. This doesn't mean run away, but indicates a steady and orderly retirement backwards, but facing the enemy.
Beat! Retreat! That concludes our demonstration of the calls of war. However, we'd like to finish by beating a selection of marches used by Devereux, all contemporary, though we have no direct evidence that they were used by armies in the civil wars. As mentioned, virtually nothing was written down at the time, and despite Charles I's attempt to impose some control over his drummers, and given how much marching was being performed, there would probably have been numerous variations based on local tunes and traditions. Drum beats might also be accompanied by a fifer, who was a civilian musician paid for by the commander out of his own pocket. Here's a selection of the marches used by Colonel Nicholas Devereux's Regiment of Foot, all of them contemporary. Footman! Beat the French march! Beat the official march! Beat the Grenadiers march! for watching our demonstration of the drums. We are the Devereux Drum Division.